Hello and welcome to the fourth episode in this Rook School series, in which I will be covering some rook pawn draws. So it's always good to study those rook endgames because they happen quite a bit in chess. So the more you study them, the better that will help you in your own games. So let's take a look at this first example. Here it is white to move. So white is trying to grab the win here. But these three examples that I'll show you today are all how to draw when you're behind in material. So what will black do to gain the draw here? And with white to move, what do you think white will do? So you can pause the video at any time if you want to try and guess the moves, or at least guess this first move. So let's take a look here. I'll turn on the analysis and these lines. Okay, so you probably guessed that white is going to try and go up here and protect his pawn so that he can bring this rook out and promote the pawn by moving to a8. All right, so we have king to c5, but what should black do here to hold the draw? Well, he wants to stay behind the passed pawn, which is usually a good idea whether you are defending or if you're trying to promote the pawn. If this rook was behind this passed pawn, white would have a much easier time trying to promote this pawn, especially with the king way over here. So now the king moves in here to protect the pawn. So what does black do? Well, according to the computer here, there's only one move, and that's to check the king here. So we have a check, which the computer says is a great move. And now what? Well, the king moves away. But this just lets the rook move right back in here behind this pawn. And so if the king moves over to protect the pawn, same thing. You just check the king away. And of course, if the king goes to a6, you could just move there and check him again. If the king tries to come down the board after the rook, as long as the rook stays behind the passed pawn, he could move up the board. And if the king tried to go back up the board after the rook, well, he could just stay away from the king, it looks like. So, the king would just move and the rook just stays behind that passed pawn, and it would end up being a draw like that. So now if we go back to the very first move, you want to watch out that the king doesn't start trying to move. And if this black king were over here on f7, well, then there would be that trap of moving the rook over to the h-file, and then if the rook captures the pawn, the rook that moved to h8 could swing in here, attacking the king and then picking off the rook. So I think I covered that in one of the earlier Rook School lessons. All right, let's move on to another example here of how to hold a draw with a rook, and these, or excuse me, in a rook endgame like this. So this is definitely worth setting up on a board or on your computer or whatever on your phone, and like going over some of these rook moves, rook endgames, trying to play against the computer and see if you can hold the draw. All right, so let's take a look at another example here. All right, so once again, white to move. This time white is behind in material, and so how does white hold the draw here? Well, let's take a look at what is happening. But before we do that, what do you think black's plan would be here to try and win this game? Well, if we take a look at this, the king is trapped behind the pawn. This pawn is trying to move to h1 and promote, but the king is blocking the path of the pawn, and this rook is doing a fine job of trapping the king in here. So black's plan would probably be to try and get this rook down on the e file and move it over to g1 here. And if the rook captures, the pawn could recapture and promote to a queen. So with that in mind, let's see what white does here. Okay, if we look at this, there's one good move here, and that is king to d2, which prevents the rook from moving to e1 and then over here to g1, forcing this rook to make a decision on what to do, giving up the g file basically. So now black just moves over here, thinking, well, I'll move to a7, swing down, and try and come over to g1. But this gives white time to move over to where the action is over here. So the rook continues with its plan, but now white has moved over here to help trap the black king in behind its own pawn. So the plan continues, but now, of course, white doesn't want to capture this rook because then the pawn would capture, promoting to a queen and checking and winning the game. So white has to give up this g file, but the king is trapped in by the king. So black tries to check the king, but the king can just move down here and keep black's king trapped in. So, what now? Black just checks again, but the white king just moves back and forth. And so this game should be a draw here. Okay, let's look at one final example in these rook pawn draw endgames. So let's take a look at the final one. And this one will be a little bit more complicated here. All right. So what do you do here? White to move. How does white hold a draw here? So in this position, white's king is way off sides here. And there is this threat of rook to a1 check. The king would move and then the pawn would promote. And white would have to sacrifice his rook to capture that promoted pawn, and black would win. So that should help you figure out what to play here. All right, let's take a look. Okay, so in this position, there's basically one move that works, and that's king to b4, which blocks that check by the rook on the white king. So the game may continue with king to c2, renewing that threat, but white just stays with the black king, using the black king as a shield. And that continues across the board here. And so now, here it starts to get a little bit trickier. We have king to g8. Now, if we had this move and continue with what we had been doing, well, it looks like this would be losing. So you don't want to do this. Why? Well, because we'd have rook to e1, and the pawn can promote, because now the rook cannot check the king because white's own king is blocking an attack on the black king. So if we go back to this position, we would have rook moving to g8 and checking. So let me go back a little bit so I can show that to you. So the kings are moving across the board like this. And then once the king moves here, well, then you don't want to follow up. You want to just check now. And if the king moves up here, well, then you can just check again. The king would have to move back. And then we have check again. So if the king moves here, which is the best move, now we have rook to h8, just staying behind that passed pawn. And then now black tries to get tricky here, but white can capture, and we have this, which looks really serious, but king to g3 saves the game here. So, the game would just end in a draw at this point. Now, one thing to look at in this whole position, if we go back to the very beginning, we realized that the white king has to move behind the black king to prevent a check by the rook. But only king to b4 worked. So what if the king, moved up here? Well, it looks like that's losing, but let's see why. This would allow the king to move up, gaining ground. So then, if we continued like we did previously, just across the board, we'll see what happens here. Now we have this same maneuver, but we see it doesn't work because now the king is able to go forward, well, not forward, but sideways. The king doesn't have to go down here, and white is not able to move in and protect his own rook. So we see how that would lead to disaster. All right, well, I'll wrap it up here. So definitely study rook endgames. In this Rook School series, I'll slowly progress and get to more complicated stuff. I was trying to keep it fairly simple for these first few lessons before I dive into some more complicated stuff, because rook endgames can get pretty crazy and be quite complicated. So just start with simple stuff first and slowly build off of it as you improve. So if you found value in this video and you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. Also feel free to leave comments or suggestions. And I'm also doing a chess questions series. So if you have any chess questions, send those in comments, and I'll pick some of the best questions and do future videos answering those questions. So thank you for watching, and have a super chess day.